Welcome home, my little foxes, the place where we listen, we relax, and we gently drift towards sleep. Welcome to your favorite storytelling channel, The Yawning Fox. Thank you for being here, for sharing this quiet space, and for allowing us to become a part of your bedtime routine. As we begin, I hope you're already feeling calm, at ease, and ready to unwind. But if your mind is still full from the day, that's perfectly okay. There's no need to force anything here. Just rest in the flow of the words and let your thoughts gently drift. Take a slow, deep breath in, and then exhale softly. Let your body begin to loosen. Sink a little deeper into the bed, into the quiet warmth that surrounds you. If your eyes are still open, allow them to close gently. No hurry. Soften the muscles in your face. Unclench your jaw. Let your shoulders release their weight. Now, imagine this, a forest at night, ancient and still. The trees rise high above you, their dark trunks standing like silent guardians. Their leaves whisper in the wind, rustling gently under the gaze of a moon that hangs low and bright in the sky. Silver light trickles down through the branches, scattered in soft pools across the mossy floor. Somewhere nearby, an owl stirs. A fox moves silently through the underbrush, and the earth hums quietly beneath it all, timeless and slow. Far off, you hear a stream, its soft voice bubbling over stones, weaving its way through roots and fallen branches. The scent of the forest wraps around you. Pine, cool water, rich soil, and a trace of something sweet, blooming in the shadows. A gentle glow appears in the distance. It's a small lantern flickering quietly atop a weathered tree stump. You walk toward it, the forest making room for your steps. As you reach the light, you sit and here, in the middle of the forest, in the company of night and stars, you feel held. This is a place outside of time, a place where the noise of the day can't reach, a place where our story begins. Today, we will be taking a journey through a twisted version of the Snow White story we all love and cherish. This Snow White, however, well, let us begin. The first frost came whispering through Valus on the night Queen Morgane decided to kill her stepdaughter. In the ivory citadel, where golden banners hung limp in the frozen air, servants scurried like mice along the corridors, their breath puffing white before them. The great braziers burned low. Morgane preferred the cold. It reminded her subjects of their mortality. Morgane stood naked before the obsidian mirror, her skin pebbling in the chill. The mirror's surface drank the dim light of her chambers, reflecting nothing at first, then swirling slowly like ink disturbed by an unseen hand. "Mirror of mine bound in bone," she murmured, pressing her palm against the glass. The surface yielded like water, shockingly warm. "Who holds beauty's rightful crown?" The mirror's voice emerged, as if from deep underwater, the words bubbling up through tar. "My queen, your beauty blights the sun, yet Snow White's has just begun. Her lips the red of dying embers, her skin the white of murdered Decembers. She walks where shadows dare not creep, and in her heart the secrets sleep. Morgaine's hand curled into a fist inside the mirror, the viscous surface clinging to her skin like molten glass. She had expected this answer, yet hearing it aloud sent a spike of rage through her gut. Behind her, the fire in the hearth guttered, though no window was open. The shadows along the walls stretched, unnaturally long. Morgaine smiled. "Show me her," she commanded. The mirror's surface rippled, resolving into an image. Snow White, kneeling in the castle's undercroft, her white gown pooling around her like spilled milk. The girl held a rat in, her pale hands stroking its matted fur with surprising gentleness. For a moment, Morgaine thought the mirror had shown the wrong vision, until Snow White's thumbs pressed suddenly against the creature's neck. The snap was audible even through the mirror. Morgaine watched, fascinated, as her stepdaughter drew a small silver knife from her bodice and slit the rat from throat to tail. She worked with the precision of a surgeon, peeling back skin to examine the organs beneath. When she reached the heart, Snow White plucked it free and held it up to the dim light, watching as the last tremors of life faded from the muscle. Then, and this chilled Morgaine more than any winter, Snow White licked the blood from her fingers with the relish of a cat lapping cream. The queen withdrew her hand from the mirror with a wet pop. "So the dove has talons after all," she murmured, watching as her stepdaughter carefully buried the rat's remains beneath the flagstones. A knock at her chamber door broke the silence. Enter. Her huntsman Vorgan stepped inside, his bulk nearly filling the doorway. In his arms, he carried a bundle wrapped in stag leather, already seeping dark stains onto the rushes. "It's done, Your Grace," he rumbled, laying the bundle at her feet. The heart of a roe deer, taken while it slept, fresh, as you requested. Morgaine crouched, unfolding the leather to reveal the glistening organ within. It was still faintly pulsing, steam rising from its surface in the cold air. "Perfect. Tell me, Vorgan," she said, running a fingernail along the coronary arteries. "When you delivered my stepdaughter to the Ironwood last summer, did she weep?" The huntsman shifted uncomfortably. "No, Your Grace." She smiled. "Said the trees would make fine company." Morgaine's lips curled. She dipped 2 fingers into the deer's heart, coating them in dark blood. "And the dwarves, did they take her in?" "Aye, though, Vorgan's brow furrowed. "They seemed to know her, called her Little Queen when they thought I couldn't hear." The blood on Morgaine's fingers had begun to smoke faintly. She rose, walking back to the mirror. "Leave me, and send word to the moor. I want the gutter poets composing songs about a princess in the wood by week's end." When the door closed, Morgaine pressed her bloody fingers against the mirror's surface. "Show me the dwarves," she commanded. The glass darkened, then resolved into 7 figures toiling in an underground chamber lit by sickly green witchlight. Morgaine recognized them at once, the miners of the Ironwood, who dug not for gold, but for the strange singing stones that grew like tumors. In the dark, Bjorn, massive as a bear, his face bisected by an old pickaxe scar. Thistle, all sharp angles and sharper tongue. Hollow, whose silence spoke volumes. Grimhild, her braids woven with funeral silver. Rattle, coughing up black phlegm. Murk, his blind eyes weeping black tears. Pitch, the youngest, who still had all his fingers. They were gathered around something on the ground. No, someone. Snow White lay on a slab of raw iron, her white dress hitched up to her thighs as Grimhild traced symbols on her pale skin, with what looked like... Morgaine leaned closer. Not ink. Blood. The mirror's image wavered as Grimhild began to chant, the other dwarves joining in. Snow White's lips moved in unison, though no sound passed through the glass. As Morgaine watched, the blood sigils began to glow, pulsing in time, with the deer heart still dripping in the queen's hand. Then, Snow White's head turned, not toward the dwarves, not toward the ritual, directly at Morgaine. Her lips parted in a smile as she whispered something the mirror couldn't convey, but Morgaine needed no magic to understand. "I see you too." The queen recoiled, breaking contact with the mirror. The image shattered, like thin ice, underfoot. For the first time in years, Morgaine felt something unfamiliar curl in her stomach. Fear, not of death, not of loss, but of being outplayed. She looked down at the deer heart in her hand, now gone still and cold. A plan began to form, one that involved poison, an apple, and a coffin made of glass. But first, she needed to pay a visit to the moor. The moor breathed its rotting breath up the 100 steps of the Needle Stair as Morgaine descended, her velvet slippers whispering against stone worn smooth by centuries of desperate feet. Morgaine had not visited the moor in daylight before. The dipping afternoon sun exposed what torchlight mercifully concealed: the sores on the children's faces, the suspicious lumps in the beggar's rags, the way the very air seemed to curdle where it pooled in the lower districts. She had dressed plainly, a grey cloak over a charcoal gown, her hair braided tight against her skull. Still, they knew her. The moorfolk melted from her path like grease from a hot knife, their eyes wide in faces gone slack with fear. All but one. The Rag King perched on his barrel throne at the base of the stairs, a child of no more than 10, with a crown of rusted nails hammered into a strip of tin. Aye, his feet knelt Sister Rot, her hands busy with a tangle of herbs, and something that squirmed, feebly. "You're early," the boy said, licking porridge from his fingers. "The moon's not ripe for picking yet." Morgaine's nostrils flared. The stench of the moor, rotting fish, unwashed bodies, the sweet tang of infection coated her tongue. "You presume much, gutterling." The Rag King grinned, showing teeth filed to points. "Presume? Nah. The rats tell me things. They say your pretty mirror's been whispering about the princess." He leaned forward, his crown glinting dully. "They say you're scared." Behind him, Sister Rot chuckled, wetly, her hands still working at whatever creature she held. A high-pitched squeal cut through the air, then silence. Morgaine's fingers twitched toward the dagger at her belt. "I require a poet." The Rag King's grin widened. He snapped his fingers, and from the shadows emerged a skeletal figure, wrapped in what might once have been scholars' robes. The man's fingers were stained black with ink, his lips cracked and bleeding. "Which one is this?" Morgaine asked, eyeing the poet's trembling hands. "Fen," the boy said. "He's got the prettiest words. Costs extra." Morgaine tossed a velvet pouch at the Rag King's feet. It landed with a heavy clink. "I want a song about a princess in the wood. Something sweet, something sad, something that will make the nobles weep into their wine." Fen's tongue darted out to catch a bead of blood from his lip. "And the truth, Your Grace. The truth." Morgaine smiled. Bury it between the verses, where only the clever will find it. Snow White knelt in the circle of black mushrooms, her palms upturned to catch the moonlight filtering through the ironwood's twisted branches. Around her, the dwarves chanted in their guttural tongue, the words slithering over her skin like living things. Bjorn's massive hands gripped her shoulders, his breath hot on her neck as he murmured the old words. Grimhild crouched before her, a bowl of something thick and dark balanced on her thighs. Again, Grimhild said, dipping her fingers into the bowl. Snow White opened her mouth obediently, letting the dwarf smear the substance across her tongue. Blood, salt, and something bitter. The taste made her eyes water, even as her stomach clenched with hunger. Swallow, Hollow signed, his blunt fingers flashing in the dim light. She obeyed, feeling the concoction slide down her throat, like a living thing. The world tilted suddenly, the trees breathing in time with her own lungs. Good girl, Thistle crooned, stroking her hair. Now see for us. Snow White blinked, and when her eyes opened again, she stood in a vast hall of black glass, the walls reflecting her face back at her 1,000 times. Except the reflections weren't hers. Some showed her younger, some older, some showed her with hollow eyes, and a mouth sewn shut. One reflection showed her wearing Morgaine's crown. At the centre of the hall stood the mirror, not Morgaine's mirror, something older, something hungrier. Its surface rippled like a pool of ink, and from its depths came a sound like a woman, screaming underwater. Snow White reached out, and Bjorn was shaking her, his scarred face tight with concern. Little Queen, you went away again. Snow White's mouth tasted of copper and candied violets. She's looking for me, she whispered. The Queen. Grimhild exchanged glances with the others. What else did you see? A hall of mirrors. Snow White pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the rabbit-fast flutter of her heart. And a door with 7 locks. The dwarves went very still. That's not possible, Rattle coughed, wiping his mouth with a stained sleeve. The hall was destroyed centuries ago. Yet she saw it, Merc murmured, his blind eyes rolling toward Snow White. Just as the prophecy foretold. Snow White looked down at her hands. The moonlight made them glow, like alabaster, like bone. Tell me, Grimhild sighed, her silver braids clinking softly. There was once a queen who loved her mirror, more than her own child. She asked it every day. Who is the fairest? Snow White finished, her voice distant. And one day, it told her the truth. Prince Edric of Lys had been lost for 3 days. When he stumbled upon the cottage, his horse had thrown a shoe, then bolted at the sight of something moving in the trees. His map was useless in this accursed wood, where the trees seemed to shift when one wasn't looking. And now this, a crooked little house half buried in the earth, its roof sprouting mushrooms like some grotesque crown. The smell of roasting meat drew him forward. Edric pushed open the door, his sword drawn. Hello? The cottage was empty, but the table was set for 8. A stew pot bubbled merrily over the fire, filled with chunks of meat and wild onions. His stomach growled. Then he noticed the bones. Not animal bones. These were too small, too delicate. Finger bones, strung on wire above the hearth like some macabre mobile. A child's skull grinned at him from the windowsill, its hollow eyes filled with black candles. Edric backed toward the door, just as it swung open behind him. "Now what do we have here?" purred a voice like honey. "And knives." Edric turned to face the most beautiful girl he'd ever seen, all porcelain skin and blood-red lips, her white dress streaked with dirt and something darker. Behind her stood 7 figures, their eyes gleaming in the shadows. The girl smiled, and something in Edric's chest went very cold. "A prince," she said, delight coloring her voice. "How convenient." The dead do not scream in Valus. They whisper. Morgane stood in the chamber of whispers, where the skulls of former queens stared empty-eyed from their niches. The gutter poet, Fen, knelt before her, his ink-stained fingers clutching a scrap of parchment like a holy relic. "Sing it," Morgane commanded. Fen's voice trembled as he began. "Oh, gather round and hear the tale of the fairest maid in winter's vale, her skin like snow, her lips like wine, lost in the woods so dark and fine." The words coiled through the chamber, winding around Morgane's ribs like ivy. She closed her eyes, listening past the surface melody to the truth humming beneath. Beware the heart that beats too still, the hand that grips and means to kill, the dwarves who dig in blackened earth, for 7 locks will prove her worth. Morgane's eyes snapped open. 7 locks. Fen swallowed hard. "The old rhyme, your grace, from before the sundering. They say—" "I know what they say." Morgane flicked her fingers, dismissing him. When the door closed, she pressed her forehead against the obsidian mirror. "Show me the locks," she demanded. The mirror's surface darkened, then swirled into an image of a massive iron door set deep in the earth. 7 keyholes adorned its surface, each shaped differently. One like a heart, another like a crown, the third a twisted root. As Morgane watched, a pale hand entered the frame, Snow White's hand pressing against the door. The iron shuddered, and from its depths came a sound like 100 souls sighing. Then the vision changed. Prince Edric, tied to a chair in the dwarves' cottage, his fine shirt torn open. A Snow White traced patterns on his chest with a silver blade. Morgane's breath caught. The prince's eyes were glassy. His lips parted in a drugged smile as Snow White leaned close, not to kiss him, to whisper. The mirror went black. Snow White counted the prince's ribs with the tip of her dagger. 5, she murmured. 6, 7. The blade dipped into the hollow at the base of his throat. "You're thinner than you look." Prince Edric's laugh was slurred. "Adventure ruins my appetite." The dwarves had dosed his wine with dwale, enough to loosen his tongue, but not enough to dull his pain. Snow White needed him awake, needed him aware. She glanced at Grimhild, who nodded and produced a small iron key from her apron. It was shaped like a rose in full bloom, its edges darkened with old blood. "The first lock," Grimhild said, pressing it into Snow White's palm. "He has the second." Snow White turned, back to the prince. "Where is it?" Edric's gaze drifted to her mouth. "Where's what?" "The key you carry." She pressed the dagger just hard enough to break skin. A bead of blood welled up, black in the firelight, the one shaped like a crown. Something flickered behind the prince's haze, recognition. Then fear. How do you know about that? Snow White smiled and licked the blood from his chest. I dreamed it. Edric was drowning. The dwale made the world swim. The dwarves' faces melted like wax. The cottage walls breathed in and out, and the beautiful, terrible girl with winter in her eyes held his beating heart in her hands. No, not his heart. Key. She pulled it from his very flesh, the metal emerging clean and shining from the wound she'd made. Edric should have screamed, should have fought. Instead, he watched, fascinated, as she held it up to the firelight. The key was, exactly as she'd said, shaped like a crown, its teeth jagged as a king's demise. She turned to the dwarves. Now we can begin. Bjorn hauled Edric upright. His massive hands were surprisingly gentle as he bound the prince's wrists with a red cord. Don't struggle, the dwarf rumbled. The more you fight, the more it will hurt. Edric's tongue felt swollen. What will hurt? Snow White pressed her cold palm to his cheek. Becoming what you were always meant to be. Then the floor opened beneath him, and Edric fell into darkness. The apple was perfect. Morgaine held it up to the torchlight. Its skin gleamed red as a fresh wound, so ripe it threatened to burst. Deep inside its flesh, the poison pulsed like a second heart. Will it work? She asked the huntsman. Vorgan shifted uncomfortably. The alchemist swears by it. One bite and I know what it does. Morgaine placed the apple carefully in a lead-lined box. Tell me of the prince. Gone, Vorgan said. His horse returned without him. The tracks lead to the ironwood. Morgaine's lips curled. How predictable. Men were always fools for pretty things. She crossed to the obsidian mirror. Show me my stepdaughter. The glass remained stubbornly black. Morgaine struck the frame with her fist. Show me. For a moment, nothing. Then, a flicker of movement. Snow White, standing before the iron door, the crown key in her hand. Behind her, the prince hung suspended in red cords, his head lolling. As Morgaine watched, Snow White inserted the first key, the rose, into its lock. The door shuddered. Then Snow White turned, not to the door, not to the prince, but to look directly at Morgaine through the mirror. Her lips formed two silent words. Watch closely. Morgaine stumbled back. As the mirror's surface cracked, a hairline fracture splitting the glass from edge to edge. From the depths came laughter, not Snow White's, something older, something hungrier. Morgaine pressed her ear to the weeping stone of the moor's deepest cellar, where even the Rag King dared not tread. The ground pulsed beneath her cheek, a slow, sick rhythm that matched no living thing. Thump, 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 like something trying to be born. She rose, shaking rot from her skirts. The alchemist's workshop stank of spoiled milk and copper, the shelves lined with jars of pickled things that still twitched occasionally. In the center of the room stood the lead-lined box containing the apple, its surface now slick with condensation. You're certain it will work? Morgaine asked. The alchemist, a hunched thing with skin like melted tallow, nodded. One bite and her heart will freeze mid-beat. No pain, no struggle, just stillness. His yellowed fingernails tapped the box. But the price was paid in full. Morgaine's hand drifted to the empty scabbard at her belt. She'd given the Fool her best dagger for this poison. A fair trade. A crash echoed from above. Splintering wood. Screaming men. Morgaine stilled. "They're here," the alchemist whispered. The cellar door exploded inward. Not with force, with growth. Thick black roots burst through the oak. Writhing like serpents, they coiled around the alchemist's ankles before he could scream, and yanked him into the dark. His shriek ended wetly. Morgaine drew her remaining dagger as the roots parted, revealing Snow White. Her stepdaughter stood framed in the ruined doorway, clad in a dress woven from shadows and cobwebs. At her throat hung a key, the rose key, its metal now black as spoiled blood. Behind her, the prince stood blank-eyed, his fine clothes replaced by a shroud of living moss. But it was Snow White's eyes that stopped Morgaine's breath, pupils blown so wide they swallowed the iris, leaving only black mirrors reflecting 1,000 starving faces. "Stepmother," Snow White crooned. Her voice was wrong, layered with whispers not her own. "You've been digging in places that don't belong to you." Morgaine tightened her grip on the dagger. "What have you done to the prince?" Snow White smiled, revealing teeth filed to points. "Opened him." She held up a second key, the crown key, now fused to her fingertip like a claw. 2 locks turned. 5 remain. The roots surged forward. Edric floated in a sea of whispers. The Dwale still held him in its velvet fist, but something new pulsed beneath his skin. A second heartbeat, thrumming in time with the roots coiling through his veins. Pretty prince. The moss sighed against his throat. Sweet sacrifice. He should have been afraid. Instead, he watched with detached fascination as Snow White pressed her hand against the queen's chest, the rose key glowing like a coal where it touched Morgaine's skin. "Did you never wonder," Snow White whispered, "why your mirror feared me?" Morgaine snarled, slashing with her dagger. The blade passed through Snow White's arm, like mist. "Did you never ask?" Snow White continued, stepping closer. "What truly happened to my mother?" The roots lashed around Morgaine's wrists, yanking her arms wide. The poisoned apple rolled from its box, coming to rest at Edric's feet. Its skin had split, revealing flesh blackened and crawling with tiny white worms. Snow White leaned in, her lips brushing Morgaine's ear. "Shall I show you what she saw in the mirror?" Edric's vision went black. The memory crashed over her like a wave of freezing oil. Her mother, not Morgaine, never Morgaine, kneeling before the obsidian mirror, her pregnant belly straining against her gown, the mirror's surface boiling as something pressed against it from within. A hand, a face, hungry. "Take my child," her mother whispered. "Take her and spare me." The mirror stilled. Then, "No!" her mother screamed as the glass shattered, shards embedding themselves in her flesh. She staggered back, clutching her belly, just as the first contraction hit. Snow White blinked back to the present. Morgaine gasped against the roots binding her, the rose key now buried halfway into her sternum. "You see," Snow White whispered, "the mirror chose me first." She twisted the key. Morgaine's scream shook dust from the ceiling. Agony. The key burned like frozen fire, spreading cracks through Morgaine's ribs. Visions flooded her, a door opening, a crown of roots, 1,000 years of sleep, and beneath it all, the terrible understanding. The mirror had never been hers. It had been waiting. For her. For Snow White. Morgaine's last coherent thought before the darkness took her was that she should have let the girl eat the apple. Edric woke to the taste of rotten apples. He lay on a bed of moss in the dwarf's cottage, his body humming with strange energy. The roots under his skin had settled into delicate traceries. Black vines winding around his bones. Across the room, Snow White bathed her hands in moonlight. The rose key and crown key now fused to her fingers like jeweled claws. "You survived," she said without turning. Edric touched his chest. Where the wound should have been, only smooth skin remained. "What did you do to me?" Snow White smiled, showing those sharp, sharp teeth. "Made you useful, outside." The trees trembled as something ancient stretched in its sleep. Morgaine dreamed of teeth. She floated in a tangle of living roots, their tendrils threaded through her veins like black embroidery floss. The pain had faded to a dull throb. The rose key still protruded from her sternum, its metal now fused with her breastbone. Through the root's latticework, she watched Snow White pace the cavern. The girl, no, not a girl, never just a girl, trailed fingers along the massive iron door where 5 keyholes remained empty. "Tell me of my mother's death," Snow White commanded. The dwarves glanced at one another. It was Grimhild who answered, her silver braids clinking like chains. "The queen screamed for 3 days when you were born," the dwarf said, stirring a pot that smelled of burnt hair. "Not from pain, from what she saw in your eyes." Snow White paused before the 3rd keyhole, this one shaped like a skeletal hand. "And the mirror shattered when you drew your first breath," Bjorn rumbled. "Your father had it remade to hide the cracks." Morgaine tried to scream through root-choked airways. She knew, she'd always known, the obsidian mirror hadn't been broken by time. It had been repaired after whatever horror emerged with Snow White. The prince moaned in his mossy cradle, his veins pulsing black beneath pale skin. Snow White drifted to his side, pressing a key claw to his throat. "Almost ready," she murmured. Edric's blood sang. The dwale's haze had lifted, replaced by something worse, crystalline clarity. He felt every root beneath his skin, every whisper in the stones. Worst of all, he understood the words now. 7. "Locks for 7 sins," the moss sighed against his cheeks. 7 keys to let us in." Snow White's fingers traced his collarbones. "Do you know why you're here, Prince?" Edric's voice wasn't his own. "Because you dreamed of me." Her smile could have frozen hell. "Because your great-great-grandmother stole from the hungry dark, stole its reflection, made it into..." She gestured to the iron door. "That." A root slithered from Edric's mouth, tasting the air like a serpent's tongue. He should have been horrified. Instead, he turned his head and saw Morgaine suspended in her living cage, eyes wide with realization. The queen mouthed a single word: "Run." Too late. Snow White pressed her rose claw to Edric's chest and bane and pushed. The 3rd key was always the hardest. Edric arched off the moss bed as Snow White's claw pierced flesh, his scream harmonizing with the roots now bursting from his ribs in bloody sprays. She worked quickly, carefully, not removing his heart, but reshaping it. The dwarves chanted in their guttural tongue as the prince's heartbeat stuttered, then changed rhythm. Now it echoed the cavern's hidden pulse. Thump, 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 like something knocking to be let in. When Snow White withdrew her claw, the 3rd key, a twisted thing of bone and black metal, clung to her fingertip. The heart key, Edric, gasped. his chest knitting shut over the hollow space where his heart had been. His eyes were no longer human. "Good," Snow White purred. "Now we can wake the others," Morgaine remembered. The memory came sudden as a knife between ribs. Her predecessor, the first Queen Elspeth, whispering the truth on her deathbed. "The mirror isn't ours. It's a cage. And one day, what's inside will want out." Now, watching, Snow White approached the iron door with 3 keys gleaming on her claws. Morgaine understood the depth of her mistake. She hadn't been fighting her stepdaughter. She had been delaying her. Snow White inserted the keys one by one. The rose key, for love's corruption. The crown key, for power's price. The heart key, for stolen life. The door shuddered. From the remaining 4 keyholes came a sound like wind through hollow bones. Snow White turned to Morgaine, her smile a razor cut. 4 remain. Will you give me yours willingly, stepmother, or must I take it?" The roots tightened around Morgaine's throat in warning. Edric rose on unsteady legs, his body both lighter and heavier than before. The hollow in his chest didn't hurt it. Sang. He crossed to where Morgaine hung, studying the Queen's ashen face. There was no fear in her eyes, only calculation. "She'll unmake you too," Morgaine croaked. Edric tilted his head, listening to the new voices in his blood. "I know." Behind them, Snow White laughed, a sound like breaking glass, as the first of the remaining locks clicked. "The dead have no shadows." Morgaine counted her breaths through the agony. Each inhalation stretched the roots threaded through her lungs. Each exhalation rattled against the rose key embedded in her sternum. The pain had become a living thing, a snarling wolf chewing her ribs from the inside. Across the cavern, Snow White knelt before the iron door, her 3 keys glinting like wet teeth in the witchlight. The prince stood sentinel behind her, his hollow chest rising and falling in time with the distant thump, thump, thump of the Moor's heartbeat. Morgaine tested her bonds again. The roots tightened in warning, drawing fresh blood where they pierced her wrists. Still fighting, Bjorn's voice rumbled through the dark as the massive dwarf emerged from the tunnel. His pickaxe scar gleamed slick in the greenish light. "Stubborn as your predecessor," Morgaine spat blood. Elspeth knew what she was unleashing. I, Bjorn, crouched before her, his breath reeking of iron and old meat. "And like her, you'll break before the end." He leaned closer. They always do. From the door came a sound like shattering ice. Snow White threw back her head and laughed, a sound that sent spiders skittering from cracks in the stone. Morgaine's blood turned to slush. The first fissure appeared in the iron door. Edric's hollow chest ached, not from pain, from absence. The space where his heart had been pulsed in time with the creeping cracks spreading across the iron door. He pressed a hand to his ribs, feeling the echo of something vast and hungry stirring beyond the barrier. "Soon," whispered. The roots coiled around his bones. Too many limbs, too many teeth. She turned to Edric, her black eyes reflecting nothing at all. "Fetch the glass," she commanded. Edric's body moved without his consent. He strode to the far wall where a sheet of mirrored glass leaned against the stone. A jagged shard taller than a man and twice as wide. The surface shimmered like oil on water, showing glimpses of things that could not be, a hall of broken mirrors. A crown of rusted nails, a queen screaming into silent glass. As Edric dragged the mirror toward the iron door, his fingers passed through the surface for one dizzying moment, and something on the other side grasped back. The 4th key required a sacrifice. Snow White ran a claw along the mirror's edge, watching her 1,000 reflections smile with 2 sharp teeth. The dwarves had gathered in a half-circle behind her, their tools in hand, not picks or hammers, but bone needles and silver thread. "Grimhild," Snow White murmured. "The song, if you please." The dwarf woman began to hum, a lullaby older than kingdoms. The others joined in, their voices weaving through the cavern like smoke. "Hush now, daughter, don't you weep. Mother's gone, but you'll keep deep. 7 locks and 7 sins, 7 ways the dark gets in." Snow White turned to the bound queen. Morgaine's eyes burned with hate. "Whatever you're planning." "I'm not planning anything, stepmother." Snow White pressed her palm against the queen's chest, feeling the frantic rabbit thump of her heart. "I'm remembering." She drove her claws in. Agony, white-hot and all-consuming as Snow White's fingers curled around Morgaine's still-beating heart. The roots held her immobile, their tendrils drinking the blood that welled from the wound. Through the pain, Morgaine saw it. The truth. Not a child. Never a child. Snow White was the mirror's hunger given flesh, a sliver of the hungry dark itself, smuggled into the world in a dead queen's womb. And Morgaine had played right into its hands. Now, Snow White crooned, for the 4th key, she squeezed. Edric watched in frozen horror as Snow White drew her hand from Morgaine's chest. Clutched in her crimson fingers was not a heart, but a key. The soul key, forged from the queen's dying breath. It pulsed like a living thing, its metal the colour of a bruise. The iron door groaned as Snow White pressed the 4th key home. Click. The cracks spread faster now, black veins racing across the metal surface. From within came a sound like 1,000 mirrors breaking all at once. The dwarves fell to their knees. "Behold," Snow White whispered, her voice layered with something vast and ancient. The door opened 1 inch, no more, no less. The scent hit first. Wet earth and rotting roses, the perfume of an opened grave. Then came the cold, so intense it burned Edric's lungs with each breath. Snow White stood transfixed before the iron door, her 3 keys dripping black fluid onto the cavern floor. The inch-wide gap revealed nothing but absolute darkness, and something moving just beyond. "More!" whispered the roots in Edric's veins. Grimhild stepped forward with a rusted iron bowl, her gnarled hands trembling as she offered it to Snow White. Inside sloshed a thick liquid that reflected no light, Morgaine's remaining blood, mixed with things Edric didn't want to recognize. Snow White dipped her claws into the bowl. When she withdrew them, the 5th key had formed, a jagged throat key shaped like a screaming mouth. "Now the prince," Bjorn rumbled. Edric tried to run. His body refused. Snow White turned slowly, her head tilting at an unnatural angle. "Don't you want to know why you were really sent to Valus, Edric of Lys?" The roots forced him to his knees. Death was not the end. Morgaine's consciousness clung to the cavern, anchored by the rose key still embedded in her corpse's chest. She watched helplessly as Snow White approached Edric, the throat key glistening. The prince strained against his invisible bonds. "My father sent me to broker peace," Snow White laughed, a sound like icicles shattering. "Your father has been dead for 10 years. The thing on your throne is one of mine." She pressed the key to Edric's neck. Morgaine saw the realization dawn in the prince's eyes moments before the metal-pierced skin. This was no diplomatic mission. He'd been delivered, a sacrificial lamb guided to slaughter by the very forces. He sought to escape, As the key slid home, Edric's scream took physical form, a ribbon of silver mist that coiled around Snow White's wrist before sinking into the iron door. The gap widened to 2 inches. The memories came faster now. Her true mother, not the dead queen, never the queen, pressing against the mirror's other side. The 7 dwarves, not miners, never miners, standing guard for centuries. The hungry dark's endless, gnawing need. Snow White turned the throat key in the 5th lock. Click. The prince collapsed, his lifeblood pooling in the shape of a crown. Bjorn hauled him upright, the dwarf's massive hands gentle as a lover's. 2 remain, Grimhild whispered. Snow White nodded, already knowing where to find them. Edric floated outside his body. The roots had hollowed him completely now. No lungs to breathe, no throat to scream, just an endless expanse of knowing. Saw the 6th key buried in the obsidian mirror's frame back at the palace. Saw the 7th and final key woven through his own stolen breath. Most terrible of all, he saw the truth of Snow White's plan. Not to open the door completely, but to become it, a living gateway, an eternal queen. The darkness beyond the iron door pulsed in time with his stolen heartbeat. Thump, thump, thump. For the first time in 1,000 years, the mirror spoke unprompted. She comes. Back in the palace, the glass began to bleed. The dead do not lie. They simply forget to mention things. Morgaine's dead eyes saw everything. The roots had preserved her perfectly. Skin like parchment stretched over bone, lips peeled back from teeth in an eternal scream. The rose key still protruded from her chest, its metal now blackened and veined with red. She watched as Snow White pressed a palm against the iron door. Her fingers splayed over the 2-inch gap. From within came a sound like 1,000 beetles skittering across glass. "Bring the mirror," Snow White commanded. Bjorn and Hollow obeyed, hauling the massive glass slab toward the door. The reflection showed nothing but swirling smoke until Prince Edric stumbled into frame. His transformation was nearly complete. Moss grew in his hollow chest cavity. Roots spilled from his sleeves. His eyes had gone completely black, like oil-filled sockets. Yet when he spoke, his voice remained heartbreakingly human. "Please, don't do this." Snow White smiled. "It's already done." She plunged her hand into the mirror. The 6th key lived in the glass. Edric felt it the moment Snow White's fingers breached the mirror's surface. A jagged pain between his ribs where his heart used to be. The glass rippled like water, then solidified around her wrist. "Grimhild," Snow White gasped. The song. The dwarves began to chant. "Break the glass and drink the wine. 7 locks to seal the 9. Blood to blood and bone to shine. Take what's yours and make it mine." With a sound like a dying man's last breath, Snow White pulled. The mirror shattered. There, glittering amid the shards like a frozen screen, was the 6th key. The mirror key, forged from the first queen's stolen reflection. The pain was exquisite. The mirror key burned like frozen fire as it fused with Snow White's fingertip, joining the other 5. Blood ran from her nose, her ears, the corners of her eyes, but she laughed through the agony. "Almost there," she whispered. The iron door groaned. The gap widened to 3 inches. From within came a whisper. "Daughter." Snow White turned to the prince. "Now you." Edric's body was no longer his own. The roots had hollowed him out completely, leaving only a vessel for the hungry dark's will, yet some small part of him remained, enough to whimper as Snow White pressed her claws to his lips. "The seventh key," she murmured. "The breath key." Edric understood then, not just his breath, his soul. As Snow White's claws pierced his mouth, the final memory surfaced. His father handing him the diplomatic papers, eyes black from edge to edge. A delivery, a sacrifice, a key. Edric's last mortal breath left his body in a silver stream, coiling around Snow White's fingers before solidifying into the final key. The door screamed open. It had been waiting so long, not to escape, to claim. Snow White stood framed in the doorway, her keys shining like stars. Behind her, Morgaine's corpse finally moved, the dead queen's hand lifting as if in blessing. The dwarves knelt. The prince died, and the hungry dark stepped into the world wearing Snow White's skin. The crown is not for wearing, they place it, they endure it, they are it. The first breath was agony. Air burned through unfamiliar lungs as the hungry dark stretched its stolen limbs. Snow White's body contorted, bones snapping and reforming, fingers elongating into talons, ribs cracking outward like a spider's legs. The dwarves prostrated themselves, their foreheads pressed to blood-soaked earth. Only Morgaine's corpse remained upright, the dead queen's glassy eyes fixed on the abomination, wearing her stepdaughter's face. "Rise!" the hungry dark commanded, its voice layered with centuries of whispers. The dwarves obeyed. Their eyes had gone black. From the ruined doorframe came a sound like tearing silk as the last remnants of the barrier fell away. The tunnel beyond stretched into impossible darkness, not a passage, but a mouth. Grimhild stepped forward, her braids unraveling into silver threads. "The crown, my queen." The hungry dark smiled with Snow White's red lips. "Bring me the prince." Death was not the release Edric had hoped for. His consciousness floated like cobwebs, tethered to the cavern by invisible strands. He watched helplessly as Bjorn hauled his lifeless body toward the hungry dark. The thing wearing Snow White's skin pressed a talon to the prince's hollow chest. "You were made for this." With one swift motion, it pulled, and from Edric's ribcage emerged a circlet of twisted roots and shattered mirror shards, glistening with black sap. The Eclipse Crown. The hungry dark placed it upon Snow White's brow. The effect was instantaneous. The crown fused to flesh, roots burrowing into temples, glass shards sinking into skin. Blood ran in rivulets down Snow White's cheeks like macabre tears as the crown began to pulse, dead, but not gone. Morgaine's spirit clung to the rose key embedded in her corpse's chest. She watched through milky eyes as the hungry dark staggered under the crown's weight. Now, with the last of her will, Morgaine's corpse moved, not toward the abomination, but to Prince Edric's discarded body. Her stiff fingers plunged into the prince's hollow chest cavity, grasping for what she knew still lingered there. Not a heart, not a soul, but the seventh key's echo. The hungry dark whirled, sensing betrayal. No! Too late. Morgaine's corpse pressed the shimmering ghost key into Edric's lifeless palm, and his fingers closed. She had been waiting. Buried deep within her own mind, Snow White watched through cracked mirrors as the hungry dark wore. Her skin. She saw everything. The crown's corruption, the dwarves' devotion, the prince's sacrifice, and now, Morgaine's gambit. The ghost key in Edric's hand blazed to life. Snow White smiled within her prison. Checkmate, stepmother. The crown screamed. Roots tore from Snow White's scalp as the eclipse crown convulsed, mirror shards exploding outward. The hungry dark staggered, clawing at its stolen face, just as Edric's corpse sat up, his hollow eyes fixed on the abomination. "You forgot," the corpse whispered with the prince's voice, "the first rule of mirrors. The greatest trick mirrors play is convincing you there's only one side." The ghost key struck Snow White's chest, and the world unfolded. Every mirror in Velis exploded simultaneously. The obsidian mirror in the palace shattered with a scream that shook the foundations. The dwarves' cavern convulsed as the iron door crumbled to rust, and at the center of it all, the eclipse crown split down the middle. She had planned this moment since before her birth. Snow White stood in the maelstrom, her hands outstretched, as the hungry dark peeled away from her skin like rotting silk. The abomination shrieked, its form flickering between 1,000 nightmare shapes. But Snow White was no longer afraid. "Did you truly believe I would let you consume me?" she whispered. "After all this time," the hungry dark recoiled. "You planned this." Snow White smiled, with all her teeth. His corpse still held the ghost key aloft. As the eclipse crown's power surged through the cavern, Edric's final memory surfaced, not of his false father, but of his true purpose. "You are the lockpick," the thing wearing, his father's skin had whispered. "The final key turns both ways." Now he understood. The seventh key wasn't meant to open the door. It was meant to break the mirror. With the last of his borrowed strength, Edric twisted the ghost key, and the hungry dark shattered into 1,000 screaming reflections. In death, she finally understood. Morgaine's spirit watched as the broken pieces of the hungry dark scrambled across the cavern floor, each fragment trying to reform, each shard crawling towards Snow White. But the girl, who was never just a girl, knelt and gathered the largest piece in her palms. "Thank you, stepmother," Snow White murmured, "for playing your part so beautifully." Morgaine's spirit howled, not in rage, but in revelation, as she finally saw the full design. The huntsman's deliberate mercy, the dwarf's careful guidance, the prince's perfect corruption, all steps in a dance older than kingdoms. Snow White pressed the dark shard to her lips and swallowed. The glass, reformed in the palace where once it had shown lies, now it showed only truth. Snow White standing amid the wreckage, the eclipse crown's remnants circling her head like a halo of broken teeth. In the reflection behind her stood 7 figures. Bjorn, his scar weeping silver. Thistle, her mouth sewn shut with shadow hollow, his hands full of screaming roots. Grimhild, her braids now living serpents, Rattle coughing up mirror shards. Murk, his blind eyes full of stars, pitch-weeping liquid night. And at the centre, Prince Edric's hollow-chested ghost, his lips moving in silent unison with Snow White's words. "I am the fairest now." The new queen ruled from a throne of fused mirrors. The wealthy still lived in the heart of Velis, though now they slept, with their eyes wide open. The moorfolk still clung to the ribs of the kingdom, though now they smiled with too many teeth, and in the deepest cellar of the palace, if one listened very closely, they might hear it, the soft, contented sigh of something that had gotten exactly what it wanted. The mirror never lies, it simply waits